Corpses rise, ghouls take flight. Splatoween is coming to get your frights. Wait, that background is correct. What? One moment, please. That's better. Hey Creagears, and welcome to a Splatoween custom Amiibo video. To celebrate Splatoween in our own WVD Creations way, we've made customs of Shiver, Frye and Big Man in their Splatoween outfits. Yeah, it's just that I never got around to painting them after it was already too late to make the video for Halloween last year. So with Splatoween coming around in full force again this year, I thought it would be fitting to finally take the time to paint them up. So let's start by giving each of them their respective ink colors. With a deep blue for Frye, a dragon's red for Shiver, and a jungle green for Big Man. While with Big Man out, I could also use the airbrush to apply a coat of skeleton bone. And I finish off my work with the airbrush with a coat of necromancer cloak to all the openings in Big Man's costume, as well as the seams that run throughout his costume. Back at the custom Amiibo station, I start to apply all of the skin tones for each character. Starting with Shiver's very light peachy skin tone. Next up is Frye with her leather brown for her skin. But with Big Man, I first needed to sponge on the rest of the coats of the glow-in-the-dark paint. Just like the costume can do in-game, I wanted to make the Amiibo actually glow in the dark. So for this, I got this special glow-in-the-dark paint. And like the bottle says, I first tried to apply this with the airbrush, but this is a really stubborn paint that always clogs out the airbrush because of the big size of the glow-in-the-dark pigments. So to get around this, I tried to stipple on the paint with this sponge, and it worked a treat. Get it? Treat? Halloween? Oh. Never mind. Not even 4 coats with the airbrush were satisfactory, but 2 extra coats with the sponge were already enough. So next time, as if there's going to be more of these. But next time I'm going to need to use this paint. It's best to stipple it on if I have another big surface to save around half of the rounds of painting and lots of cleaning of the airbrush. While that dries, I can get Shiver again and start to apply some of the dragon's red details around the Amiibo. Stuff like the edges on their cape, and around the white stripe, and also the edges of her tentacles. After that, I can go back to Big Man and finally apply the Necromancer cloak, or dark grey on his feet and tail. Once those had a chance to dry, I also used the paint to touch up the openings in the costume to add a little bit of darkness to these and add a darker line through all of the stitches. Back to Shiver, I now use a bright red to add her pupil. Once I'd used a bit of the dragon's red to make for the shading around her eye by blending it with more of her lighter skin tone. And the same skeleton bone is then also used for the big bone on top of Big Man. Shocking, right? Luckily, thanks to the airbrush and the coats of glow-in-the-dark paints, the two different coats of skeleton bone developed quite differently between the costume and the actual bone, but this also gets exaggerated with some of the other colors soon enough. But first I want to apply the black to the inside and outside of Shiver's coat. The same black is then also used for our eye mask, now that we've already applied the shading and the red pupil. With also some black for her lipstick. Finally we, of course, also add the black to her tentacles. Once these had dried a bit, I then blended a transition between the red and the black by mixing the paints in a few different consistencies to make for a smoother blend. And I then finish these off by blending the seams with a wet, clean brush. At last, I can also use one of the colors for Frye. Since black is a very large part of her design, I can immediately cross off a lot of stuff like her pants, the crop top, and a lot of her tentacles. However, since Frye now needs to dry, I need to go back to Shiver and use a bit of Frye skin tone to add a light shade of leather brown to her fingers. And these then get finished off with some more dragon's red for her fingertips. Now for a bit more Big Man, I can finally add a lighter tone to his big bone. Don't take it out of context. trying to airbrush as much as possible on the surface that faces upwards, and the same technique is then also used with some necrotic flash for the lower surfaces. This then not only adds a darker but also a bit of a greenish shade to the bone. With the bone drying, I can do a bit more Frye with a mix of moon dust and lava orange for the ends of her tentacles. Which is also another one that gets mixed with the blue that's attached to it and blended together. Then some white is used for the shark teeth on Shiver's ear. Then Shiver's chest wrap gets some extra detail with these very thin lines with the oak brown. All the while, I'd also worked on some replacement flowers for the one that also did not survive the printing process. For these, I'd used a toothpick as the base for the flowers, and around these I then added 5 petals made from some craft paper, made to be 2mm wide on one end, 5mm wide on the other, and 10mm or 1 cm long. These then get rounded off at the thicker end, and with 5 of these around the toothpick, I add 3 little strands of the 1mm wire, and these then get a coat of red to match with the rest of the amiibo. Meanwhile, Frye gets her fingertips painted with some more deep blue to match the rest of her ink color. These I added thin down with water so that I could build up the layers of blue to get the transition from pink to blue. Finally, I add some gold for the deep cut logo on Shiver's cloak, and her hairpins underneath the red flowers. Next, Frye gets her eyes back with some white for both her eyes and her lashes. And also her fangs, just as long as you first apply some blue to the back of her mouth. With the bone now dry, I drilled some 1mm holes for these small aluminium wires, since the original wires did not survive the cleaning of the supports with how thin they were. So some new ones were added by wrapping the wire around the bone and spinning the ends together. I can also add some over the wire around the bone. But we still have one big thing missing for Frye, all of her accessories. But since these are so thin and tiny, it was almost impossible to 3D print with the supports in resin. Not to mention even the fact that these aren't even models. These are just a sheet with a texture on it. So for this, I had to think about how to make these ourselves. The first step of which became making these minuscule metal rings with more of the 1mm wire wrapped around another toothpick. This spiral I can then cut into many different rings and bend the ends together. These I then superglue onto another oval of wire that I'd already superglued around Frye's shoulder, dipping the 2 ends of each ring into the glue to both attach it to the rest of the necklace and hide the ends within the glue. This then gets finished with another piece of wire glued to the circles, And these then get some gems glued to their ends. And while we're already gluing on accessories, I can also add the flowers to the back of Shiver's head. Back to painting, we can finish off Big Man by adding his eyes behind the holes in his costume with some ash grey. The same ash grey is then also used for the underside of his tail. And the little pattern on his feet, with some necromancer cloak to add some of the dark grey spots back over the pattern. Lastly, we have his pupils with some black arches, and with that, we've actually already finished Big Man. Now back to Shiver. With all of these greys ready on my wet palette, I can use these to make the gradient on our tights that goes from black to a necromancer cloak, then a uniform grey, an ash grey, and finally a little bit of white. I apply these in order to the tights and blended the edges with a wet, clean brush. I then mix crystal blue with a little bit of bright pink to mix for a darker shade of blue with a bit of a purplish shade. This I then use to clean up the ends of Frye's fingertips and now also add it to her eyelashes. I also use it on the lower end of her iris, with some of the moon dust and orange mixed for the top part. This then gets finished with this orange cross, that I then close off with this tiny line of pure moondust yellow. I also use this purplish blue to make these magical holes in Frye's pants, together with some of the original deep blue for the background color. And then I finish these by using a bit of pure crystal blue to paint on where her legs would be, since looking through these holes in game her legs have a little bit of a glowing bluish tint to them. I also added these curves onto the white stripes on Shiver's cloak with some more necromancer cloak. And with this spiraling bracelet from craft paper on her arm, I can finally add all of the gold to Frye's accessories. Starting with the deep cut emblem, I then go around the cylinders on her hip together with the rest of the chains. Next is all of the necklace that we just made. And the bracelets. And finally, the chain on her head. With all the gold applied and dry, I can start to finish Frye with some black on the ropes on her tentacles. Then some more crystal blue is used for all of the spots on the blue parts of her tentacles. And some moondust yellow for her yellow parts. And of course, the traditional mummy's ropes for the undersides of her tentacles. Same on Shiver. Lastly, some face paint still needs to be applied, with some more of the moondust orange mix. And with that, we've also finished Frye. And to finish Shiver, all that was left to do was to make this little ghost seal, inspired by these traditional style Japanese ghosts that have these seals in front of their heads. Not because it's anything official, although the design was inspired by how her fan looks with her Splatoween outfits. It was more so something I needed to make so that I could cover up this hole in the Amiibo base that was a result of a printing error. All that was left to do was to apply a satin finish coat over all 3 of them, and after a coat of gloss varnish on the tentacles, the eyes and the ink, we have officially finished our deep cut Splatoween amiibos.